Hi, this is Gretchen Peters with John Broughton, and you're listening to Retrospectives on 3SER KC Radio.
There's a dog a-barking, there's no Sunday parking.
Okay. Now, the last time we spoke was between the first and second albums. Back then, could you have imagined writing a batch of songs as personal as those on this record?
Probably not. No, I mean, I couldn't have imagined, all the events that took place that led up to this new record. It's been a long time since I've been to Australia, and since a lot of songs under the bridge, so to speak.
Yeah. An intensely personal piece of work written, I guess, during a time of great upheaval for you. Was it a therapeutic experience to write those songs? It was definitely therapeutic, because I think all writing, at least all writing of a personal nature, is that there is a point where you stop just sort of funneling all your emotions and stuff into the songs, and then and the writer kind of takes over, and it becomes about what it always ends up becoming about, which is turning those songs into real songs as opposed to a journal of sorts. I think I had a lot of emotional sort of fuel for the fire, so to speak. But I think in the end, if you're a writer, you end up at some point looking at the songs and saying, okay, well, that's all well and good, but is it a song? Does it do its job as a piece of art as opposed to a personal message, so to speak. There's a famous quote of Bob Dylan's about one of his albums, which was written during a similar period in his life, that he couldn't understand anyone being interested in hearing about that kind of pain. Were you tentative at all about putting it all out there for everyone to hear?
I was, and I guess you're speaking of Blood on the Track.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because that album was a huge influence on me while I was writing this album. And I never really thought about it until you just pointed it out, but that's right. And I had the same feeling. I mean, I think I had a real turning point. The reason I decided to write about my divorce and what I was going through was because I really kind of felt like I had no choice. It was really about a 5-minute conversation with myself. What else are you going to write about? I mean, this is the most dramatic thing that's probably ever happened to you, and so of course you're going to write about it. But I had the very same reaction. At first, I wondered why anybody would care, about this very personal episode in my life, and then I realized that it's not really about people wanting to know the details of your life as much as it is being given a gift, as it were, in this opportunity to delve into a part of human life that almost all of us have experienced to one extent or another, and bringing that experience to other people in a way that they can maybe relate to it and find some solace and feel that they're not alone.
Would this be the first time you've written songs wholly and solely specifically for one album project, rather than go into your well of songs that you'd already written?
Well, this is the first time I think that I really sat down and said, I'm going to write a record and it's going to be about this. I mean, I always, before my records, had felt sort of more like collections of songs. Now, there was definitely a sense of, I always had a sense of whether, in the end, whether a song belonged on a record or not, belonged on a collection. I had a sense of cohesiveness about it, but yeah, I never really wrote an album before. This was definitely a big departure for me that way.
I read somewhere you described yourself as now having a renewed love affair with music. Did you find yourself losing interest somewhere along the way?
I did. I think it was just sort of part of a larger malaise that took me a while to identify. I had been doing this. I had been doing music, professionally for, 16, 17 years, and the challenge always
when you're doing it for long term, the challenge is always staying fresh and interested and not being jaded. And I found myself feeling a bit jaded and disinterested in it, and it took me a while to realize that that was not a natural state for me. That I'm not naturally sort of built that way. But I think it was part of a general kind of unhappiness that took me a while to identify. It was all sort of tied in with my personal stuff, and of course my ex-husband and we worked very closely together. I mean, he was my manager, record producer, so all of that stuff was sort of tied together. It was not, in a sense, it wasn't just a divorce that we went through, but a professional divorce as well.
Was there a period of downtime there where you just weren't writing?
Well, there was a period when I realized that emotions were too high for me to be a fair and capable writer. Let me put it that way. I mean, I was collecting ideas. I don't think I've ever had a time in my life when I was as productive in terms of coming up with ideas as during that period of great upheaval. I did have, thank God, enough sense to know that you have to let those things sort of mature and age a little bit, or you end up writing sort of a diatribe kind of thing, which I wasn't interested in doing at all. I mean, I really wanted to tell my own story, but I didn't want it to be an angry or particularly bitter or angry sounding album, because that's not what I'm interested in. So yeah, there was a time when I just realized I wasn't going to be able to finish these ideas. They were lying around like little pieces of things for probably a year in some cases.
Now, I believe there was a tour of the United Kingdom after your last record, which you now look on as a major turning point for you in terms of your music and career. What happened over there?
In the UK?
Yeah.
I had been going over, I've had a pretty wonderful touring career over in the UK, but I hadn't been really going over enough to really have as much momentum as I would have liked. Basically, I was touring every time I had a new album, and since I'm not that prolific, that was every 3 years or 4 years or something like that. And I think there were a lot of people that were encouraging me to stay home and write songs because it was certainly the most lucrative part of my career, but that really wasn't getting at what it was that motivates me to write or make music at all, which is the live performance. I need that like a tree needs water, So I was over in the UK in 2004, and we were touring, and I hadn't been over for 3 years. And I had been through this phase of being very disillusioned with music and the music business and thinking I just wasn't interested anymore. And somehow, for some reason, I got on the bus and put my headphones on, and I started listening to something. It was a David Gray album, and I felt inexplicably full of joy and happy. And I realized, really, in that one moment, I realized, this is what makes me happy. Why am I not doing this? I'm out here on the road. I'm getting to play every night for people. It's the most immediate, honest transaction that ever happens in the entire equation of the music business. And why do I not do this? And it was just a kind of an epiphany. And I realized that it was time for me to, take the reins and decide for myself, what I wanted to do with my career. And that was a really major moment for me.
Yeah. I believed along the way that
I've been working really hard ever since.
I believe along the way that you received something of a fan letter from Tom Russell. That must have been a great encouragement to have a stamp of approval from a fellow performer, I guess.
Well, it was. It was a bolt out of the blue. The wonderful thing about Tom Russell reaching out to me is that it came just when I needed for some sort of a door to open, and he
he was writing me completely out of the blue, saying he'd heard my album Halcyon and he was a big fan of the album and the writing, but also of my singing, and he wanted me to come and sing on his record. Well, I ended up, going and singing on his last 2 records, but it was a real validation in terms of myself as an artist, and that was huge to me. And he also did me the great favor of sort of presenting me to the folk audience in the U.S., which I really hadn't played in front of much. And he brought me out on stage at Kerrville Folk Festival, and it was sort of, here she is, and she's from Nashville, but it's okay, she's one of us kind of a thing, because there can be that sort of, backlash kind of attitude about Nashville. If you put the word Nashville hit songwriter in front of someone's name, not everybody thinks that's such a great thing.
Yeah.
So, Tom did, he did amazing things for me. I will be forever grateful to him for that. And, the collaboration that we've had has been so much fun. Playing shows with him, he's a brilliant writer. He really is one of our very, very best.
Certainly is. Now, this is your first time in the studio with a new producer, but I believe you were in no doubt as to who you wanted for this project.
No, I knew I wanted Doug Lancio if I could possibly find a way to make it work. I mean, I approached him first. I simply said, I'm a huge fan of your guitar playing and the work you did with Patty Griffin, especially on the 1,000 Kisses album, which I think is still one of the greatest albums I've heard in the last 10 years, probably. And I just, I didn't want to make that album over again, but I just felt like his sensibility was going to be the right thing for me. It was going to bring these songs a certain depth and a level of mystery and change the sound, which I was very, very anxious to do, from my previous records. And it did all that and more. He was a joy to work with.
There is definitely a more intimate feel to this record, one that brings the performer closer to the listener than perhaps your past records have. Do you think that's been a missing element in the past?
I think that there was a certain, and I'm proud of my first 4 records. I think there was a certain reticence. There was a certain overly pristine quality to them, at least in terms of what I would be looking for now. I mean, I realized, and I think part of that, is it's sort of almost in the air in Nashville. You have to really kind of almost work to get players to play more naturally and loose, and there's such an emphasis on perfection here. And but yeah, I mean, I wanted it intimate. I wanted to feel, when you put the record on, I wanted it to sound like, which is what we did, that you were hearing a bunch of people sitting around in a room playing, and that's how we recorded it for the most part.
There are certainly some uplifting songs on the album as well. It's not all drama and upheaval. Were you particularly, was it particularly important to you to represent those moments as well?
Well, the period of time that I was sort of documenting was the end of one relationship, but it was also the beginning of another. Mm-hmm. And that accounts for the joy on the record, for sure. I mean, it was. I always say it was a time in my life that combined the absolute worst and the absolute best, and I think you get that from the songs. There was a lot of joy too, and I think when you reach a certain age and you find happiness, in the love area, there's a certain age that you think, well, I didn't think that was in the cards, and so I think you appreciate it more, because I think when you're 20, you think that everything is limitless, and when you're, in your 40s, you realize it's not, and that accounts for a lot of the happy stuff on the record.
Do you think you'll be looking back on this record in a few years' time and pointing to it as a major turning point in your songwriting?
I'm sorry, say again? I didn't get the question.
That's fine. Do you think in a few years' time you'll be looking back on this record and pointing to it as a major turning point in your songwriting?
I hope so. It feels that way. It certainly felt like a sea change to me.
I think one of the revelations I had was that I could write about my own life, and as simple as that sounds, it was rather a large revelation. And I think, just in terms of sort of peeling away the layers and the sort of the artifice, and there's a lot of artifice to songwriting, and that's not to say that that craft and all that are bad things, because they're absolutely essential, but peeling away the layers, and in other words, learning how to reveal as opposed to create. It's almost the thing that Michelangelo said about sculpting. He said it wasn't, he didn't create the sculpture, he just removed the parts of the stone that didn't belong there. And I love that idea, because I think that's what I'm trying to learn how to do. And songwriting, as singing is and performing is, songwriting is one of those endless learning experiences. You never master it. You just learn more and more in bits and pieces as you get older.
Now, you touched on the performance side of your career earlier on. Is that an area now where you're going to maintain a stronger focus towards the performing side?
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'm getting ready to go on a tour that's going to take up most of 2.5 months here in the States. I'm going to be back in the UK a couple times in the next 6 months, and I hope to be back in Australia. The last time I was there was, I believe, 2000.
That sounds about right, yeah.
And I had such a wonderful time. I've been telling everybody about it since. It just stands out as one of my great travel experiences in my life.
Fantastic. We get you down here for festival season. You could spend a few months here. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I was at Tamworth the last time I was there, and we just had a heat wave here in Nashville that would give Tamworth a run for its money.
Is there anything about this record you would like to go back and do again, or you think you've really nailed this one?
Well, I'd love to work with Doug Lancio again. I would do that in a heartbeat. The truth is, I didn't use up all the song ideas that I had, but I don't want to make, Divorce Part 2. I don't want to do that. It's a bit overwhelming to think right now about what's next in terms of albums, because this project felt so big to me. It felt like a really, it was a really special one. So I'm kind of going to give myself the break of, letting that happen naturally. I don't think you can force it, but I definitely would. I would love to play with the same band again. I'd love to work with Doug, and I feel like we only just really touched on the surface of what we can do. So definitely those circumstances, I'd put myself in that studio with those people all over again. Yeah,
well, that was pretty much my next question. How do you follow something like that? Do you just take a step back for a while before you even think about it?
I think you have to. You have to get, first of all, let enough time go by to get those voices out of your head that are, if the album was received well, to get those voices out of your head that are saying, well, so what are you going to do now? Which is, always the ghost that haunts any writer's dreams, But I think it has to happen naturally. And, usually it starts with 1 or 2 songs, and then you go, aha, this is where this is going. This is the direction. But I think, as I've said before, I really look at writing as more of an act of self-discovery than self-expression. I oftentimes don't know what it is that I want to write about till I start writing it, and then I look at it and I realize, okay, so this is what's on your mind. And I think, 1 or 2 songs like that, and I'll probably have an idea of what's coming.
Terrific. Well, Gretchen, I better let you go. Because of my miscalculation of time, I've taken up way too much of your time already. Thank you so much for...
I've enjoyed it. That's quite all right. I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you.
Congratulations on a wonderful record, and we look forward to the chance of seeing you down here again. It's been way too long.
Yeah, I'd love to be back soon.
Okay.
As soon as possible.
All the best, Gretchen. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.